On the morning of July 25th, 2024, the most powerful drug lord in the world got dressed, left his safe house, and walked into a trap. He had spent 40 years building an empire that stretched from the poppy fields of the Sierra Madre Mountains to the streets of Chicago, Atlanta, and New York. He had survived assassinations, government raids, the collapse of every cartel around him. He had watched his partner, the most famous criminal on earth, get captured twice, then locked away forever. And through all of it, he remained free. His name was Ismael Zambada Garcia. The world knew him as El Mayo. And on that Thursday morning, the one person on earth he trusted completely, a man he had known since the boy was born, a man he considered almost a son, was waiting for him at a ranch on the outskirts of the city. What happened next would not only end El Mayo's 40-year run from justice, it would start the bloodiest war in Sinaloa's history. To understand what happened that morning, you need to understand who Ismael Zambada Garcia actually was, because most people have never heard of him. And that was exactly the point. He was born on January 1st, 1948, in the state of Sinaloa, Mexico. A farmer's son from the mountains, no formal education to speak of, no famous family name. But he had something rarer than either of those things. He had patience. By the 1970s, El Mayo was working for the Juarez Cartel, the original powerhouse of Mexican drug trafficking. He wasn't a gunman. He wasn't flashy. He was the guy who figured out logistics, how to move product, how to pay the right people, how to stay invisible while everything around him moved. In 1989, the entire Mexican drug world was restructured overnight. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the man who ran everything, got arrested. The federation he built shattered into competing factions. Out of those ashes, a new cartel was born, the Sinaloa Cartel. And El Mayo was there at the beginning, not as the face, not as the boss people feared, as the architect. He partnered with a man who was everything he wasn't: loud, dramatic, impossible to ignore. Joaquín Guzmán López, El Chapo. While El Chapo became the most wanted man in the world, escaping from prison, building tunnels, making headlines, El Mayo quietly ran the actual machine underneath. The supply chains, the bribery networks, the deals with Colombian cocaine producers, the routes through Sonora, Baja California, through Arizona and Texas, into every major city in the United States. One journalist called him the George Washington of dope in Mexico. That's not a compliment, but it is accurate. For 4 decades, the DEA, the FBI, the Mexican military, they all knew his name. They knew what he did. They could not catch him. He never used a cell phone for more than a few days before changing it. He moved constantly between safe houses in the mountains of Durango. He trusted almost nobody. He never gave interviews. He was never photographed willingly. In 40 years of running one of the most powerful criminal organizations on earth, he was never arrested, not once. Then El Chapo fell. Captured in 2016, extradited to the United States in 2017, convicted in 2019, sentenced to life in a supermax prison. And El Mayo, for the first time, was truly alone at the top. But he wasn't completely alone. El Chapo had sons, and El Mayo had raised them like they were his own. El Chapo had 4 sons who mattered in the cartel world. Between them, they called themselves Los Chapitos, the Little Chapos. There was Ivan Archivaldo, the oldest, the most powerful, the strategist. There was Jesus Alfredo, violent, unpredictable, feared even by his own people. There was Ovidio, the one who got arrested in 2023 and extradited to the United States to face fentanyl trafficking charges. And then there was Joaquín Guzmán López. Of the four brothers, Joaquín was the quietest, the least talked about, the one who stayed in the background while his brothers made news. He was also El Mayo's godson. El Mayo had watched this boy grow up, knew him since he was small, trusted him the way you trust someone who's part of your family, not just your business. That trust was about to be weaponized. After El Chapo's extradition, Los Chapitos transformed the Sinaloa Cartel's business model. Out with cocaine and heroin. In with fentanyl. Fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. The profit margins are enormous. The raw materials come from China. The manufacturing happens in Mexico. And the product flows north, pressed into counterfeit pills that look like prescription medication, into the United States, where it killed over 70,000 Americans in 2022 alone. The Chapitos made billions. They threw parties, commissioned narco corridos, ballads celebrating their crimes, posted videos on social media. El Mayo watched all of this and said nothing publicly. But behind closed doors, the tension was building. Old money versus new money, old methods versus reckless ones. A man who had survived 40 years by staying invisible versus a generation that lived on social media. And underneath it all, a question was forming. A dangerous question. Who actually runs the Sinaloa Cartel now? In the weeks before July 25th, 2024, El Mayo was not in Culiacan. He had been hiding in the mountains of Durango, his preferred refuge, the terrain he had navigated for 4 decades. But something brought him down from the mountains about a week before everything happened. He was sick. According to people close to him, El Mayo had cancer, and a 76-year-old man hiding in the mountains of northern Mexico needs doctors. So he came to Culiacan to receive treatment. And while he was there, he got a call. Joaquín Guzmán López reached out to him. There was a political problem, Joaquín said. A dispute between the governor of Sinaloa, Rubén Rocha Moya, and a politician named Héctor Cuen, former mayor of Culiacan, former rector of the state university, a man with deep connections to the cartel world. These two men were locked in a bitter feud over who would control the state's most powerful university. El Mayo was asked to mediate. This was not unusual. The Sinaloa Cartel had always operated as a shadow government, drug lords settling disputes between politicians, deciding who gets elected, who gets paid, who gets threatened. El Mayo had done this dozens of times over 4 decades. It was part of the job. So when Joaquín, his godson, the boy he'd known his whole life, asked him to come to a meeting at a ranch just outside the city, El Mayo agreed. He had no reason not to. The location was called Huertos del Pedregal, a residential ranch complex on the outskirts of Culiacan. El Mayo arrived a little early that morning with his security team. 2 bodyguards entered with him. 2 stayed outside the perimeter. He saw what appeared to be a large number of armed men in green military uniforms. He assumed they were there for protection, for the politicians, or for Joaquín's faction. This was cartel business. Armed men were normal. He proceeded inside. There was a table. On the table, fruit. El Mayo walked toward the meeting area, and then he saw something unexpected. Joaquín Guzmán López, not at the table, not waiting to shake hands. Joaquín was there, but his posture was wrong. His expression was wrong. El Mayo later wrote, in a statement released through his attorney, "As I walked toward the meeting area, I saw Joaquín Guzmán López, whom I've known since he was a child, and he gestured for me to follow him." El Mayo followed him. He walked into a dark room, and then the world ended. 6 men in military uniforms were waiting. They moved the moment El Mayo stepped into the room. According to his later account, and the account of his attorney, Frank Perez, El Mayo was thrown to the ground. He suffered injuries to his back, his knees, and his wrists. A black bag was pulled over his head. His legs were bound. He was thrown into the back of a pickup truck. Outside, his two bodyguards who had entered the ranch with him, Jose Rosario Heras Lopez, a commander in the State Judicial Police of Sinaloa, and Rodolfo Chaides, a longtime member of his security team, were overpowered. What happened to them is unknown. According to cartel sources, they may have been killed. Their fate has never been officially confirmed. Two other bodyguards who had stayed outside the perimeter managed to escape. El Mayo was driven approximately 35 kilometers to a private airstrip. His hood was still over his head. He was still bound. At the airstrip, he was loaded onto a small plane, a Beechcraft King Air. Joaquín Guzmán López got on the plane with him. The hood was removed. Joaquín tied El Mayo's legs to the seat with zip ties. There were 3 people on that plane: El Mayo, Joaquín, and the pilot. The plane flew north, over the mountains of Sonora, over the desert, toward a place El Mayo had spent 40 years trying to stay away from: the United States. At approximately 4 p.m. on Thursday, July 25th, 2024, the Beechcraft King Air landed at a small private airfield in Santa Teresa, New Mexico, just outside El Paso, Texas. One worker at the airport later told Reuters that he saw the plane land and noticed something unusual. Federal agents were already there, already on the tarmac, already waiting. The doors opened. El Mayo Zambada, the man who had evaded every law enforcement agency in 2 countries for 40 years, stepped off that plane in zip ties and was arrested. In Mexican cartel history, there had never been a fall like this. Not a raid, not a firefight, not a dramatic manhunt. He was delivered by his own godson. Here is what we know about why Joaquín Guzmán López did what he did, and here is what we don't. U.S. officials confirmed that Joaquín had been negotiating with American law enforcement for months, possibly as long as 2 months before July 25th. He had decided to surrender. He had decided to cooperate. The Department of Homeland Security and the FBI were involved in the planning. But here is where the story gets murky. The U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Ken Salazar, said publicly that this was an operation between cartels, where one turned the other one in. He stated that no American resources were involved in bringing El Mayo to U.S. soil, that the U.S. government had no flight plan, that the pilot was not American, and that federal agents didn't know exactly when the plane would land until it was already in the air. But a Sinaloa Cartel operative who spoke to investigative outlet Crash Out told a different story. He claimed that American agents, referred to in cartel code as nuestros vecinos, our neighbors, were physically present at the Huertos del Pedregal ranch when El Mayo was taken. If true, that would mean American law enforcement was on Mexican soil, participating in an unsanctioned kidnapping of a foreign national. That is a serious allegation. It has not been confirmed. What has been confirmed? Joaquín cut a deal. The specifics remain sealed. He appeared in court and pleaded not guilty, likely as part of a cooperation arrangement that will eventually see charges reduced or dropped in exchange for testimony. What did Joaquín have to offer? Everything. Names of corrupt Mexican officials, routes, tunnel locations, money laundering networks, the architecture of the most sophisticated drug trafficking organization in the world, and the man who built most of that architecture, El Mayo himself. On September 13th, 2024, Ismael El Mayo Zambada appeared in federal court in Brooklyn, New York. He was in a wheelchair, He pleaded not guilty to 17 counts: drug trafficking, firearms offenses, money laundering, murder conspiracy, running a continuing criminal enterprise. Almost exactly 1 year later, on August 25th, 2025, he changed his plea. He pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy and to running a continuing criminal enterprise. And in a moment that no one in the history of the Sinaloa Cartel could have predicted, El Mayo Zambada issued an apology. I recognize the great harm illegal drugs have done to the people in the United States and Mexico. I apologize for all of it, and I take responsibility for my actions. 40 years, billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of kilograms of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl. And it ended with a 76-year-old man in a wheelchair in a courtroom in Brooklyn reading an apology. But the story didn't end there, not even close. The day El Mayo landed in El Paso, something else happened in Culiacan. Hector Cuen, the politician who was supposedly the reason for the meeting, the man El Mayo believed he was going to mediate for, was killed. Official reports said it was a robbery gone wrong. 2 men on a motorcycle at a gas station. El Mayo's attorney said otherwise. He said Hector Cuen was murdered at the same ranch. At the same time, El Mayo was being kidnapped, a witness at a crime scene that needed to be erased. That same night, across Culiacan and throughout Sinaloa, the phones were ringing. Cartel soldiers loyal to El Mayo were getting the news. Their boss, the man they had pledged everything to, was gone, taken by the Chapitos, by the sons of the man El Mayo had built an empire with. The word spreading through the narco world was not arrested. The word was traition, betrayal. For 6 weeks after the arrest, there was an uneasy quiet. People in the know understood what was coming. The question was only when. The answer was September 9th, 2024. At dawn, across multiple neighborhoods in Culiacan simultaneously, the war began. El Mayo's son, Ismael Zambada Siqueiros, known as Mayito Flaco, gave the order. His field commander, a man known only as El Comanche, coordinated synchronized strikes across Sinaloa. It was not a skirmish, it was a declaration. What followed is almost incomprehensible in scale. In the year after El Mayo's arrest, homicides in Sinaloa rose by more than 400%, more than 2,400 killings, more than 2,900 disappearances. Schools were closed. Independence Day celebrations were canceled. The city of Culiacan, over 1 million people, became a war zone. At the peak of the violence, someone was dying in Sinaloa every 6 hours. The Chapitos, Los Chapitos, had the city strongholds. The Mayitos, Los Mayitos, La Mayiza, had the mountains and the rural routes. Both sides recruited teenagers. Both sides used drones armed with explosives. Both sides left bodies with messages tied to bridges and overpasses. A Sinaloa Cartel operative speaking anonymously to CBC News put it simply, "There is no respect for children, no respect for women, no respect for the elderly. There is no respect for anything." And then, of the two factions, only one can remain. This was not a war between rival cartels fighting over territory. This was a family destroying itself. Because one member of that family decided to make a deal. There are things about July 25th, 2024 that may never be fully answered. Did the United States government know the kidnapping was going to happen? Official position: no. The U.S. ambassador said American resources were not involved. The flight plan was not filed. The pilot was not American. But a Beechcraft King Air crossed an international border with 2 people who had combined DEA rewards totaling over $20 million on their heads. and federal agents were waiting on the tarmac before the plane landed. Someone knew. One detail that has been documented: flight tracking services showed the plane stopped transmitting altitude and speed data for approximately 30 minutes while flying over northern Mexico before the signal resumed near the US border. That gap has never been explained. Did Joaquín act alone? His brothers, Iván Archibaldo and Jesus Alfredo, have denied knowing about the plan, but they have not spoken publicly in detail. They remain at large, running the Chapitos faction, fighting a war that their brother's deal ignited. What motivated Joaquín specifically? Pressure from US law enforcement? A personal dispute with El Mayo that has never been made public? A desire to secure a deal before his brother Ovidio, already in US custody, could offer the same information first? We don't know. And the biggest question of all, what does El Mayo know? What is he telling the FBI right now in a federal detention facility in Brooklyn about 40 years of the most sophisticated drug trafficking operation in the Western Hemisphere? He knows the names of corrupt Mexican governors, generals, police chiefs. He knows the banking networks used to launder cartel money across 3 continents. He knows the people El Chapo paid, the politicians his cartel owned, the tunnels they built under the US-Mexico border. The prosecutors who have him aren't just building a drug case, they're building a map. There is a ranch on the outskirts of Culiacán. It sits at the end of a quiet dirt road. A mule grazes nearby. The walls are still standing. The table where fruit was set out for a meeting that was never what it appeared to be. That table is gone. The politicians who were supposed to attend were never there. The meeting was the lie. And the lie brought down the most untouchable man in the history of Mexican organized crime. El Mayo Zambada spent 40 years proving that visibility was vulnerability. That the best way to survive in a world of violence was to never let the world see your face. He outlasted everyone. He outlasted the Tijuana Cartel, the Gulf Cartel, the Beltran Leyva organization, the Juarez Cartel, the Knights Templar. He outlasted his own partner. He was not beaten by the DEA. He was not caught in a raid. He was not betrayed by an informant who feared prison. He was brought down by a person he loved, by family. In the year since El Mayo's arrest, more than 2,400 people have been killed in Sinaloa. Most of them were not cartel members. They were taxi drivers, students, nurses, farmers. People who happened to live in a city where 2 factions of a criminal empire decided to settle a betrayal with gunfire. The war between Los Chapitos and Los Mayitos is still ongoing. No end is in sight. El Mayo Zambada will spend the rest of his life in an American federal prison. He is 77 years old. Joaquín Guzmán López is somewhere in the United States, cooperating with prosecutors, his future uncertain. His brothers, Iván and Jesus Alfredo, remain fugitives, running a cartel that is consuming itself. And somewhere in the mountains of Durango, the infrastructure that El Mayo built still operates. New people, old routes, the machine keeps running. Because that's the thing about empires built on violence and betrayal. They don't end when the founder falls. They just find new people to destroy.